Hello, and welcome to Split Your Head. I'm your host, Bob, and today's special guests are two people who have been on before and always have a place in the podcast, Dr. Ethan Lyon and Jetta. Two of the most intelligent and articulate cinephiles I know, whose opinions and discussions on film always lead my brain down pathways of new circuitry. So naturally, I had to have them on to talk about pain. Not just owie content, but the many definitions and relationships one can have with pain. Our three films that we will be analyzing and discussing are Stephen Dwoskin's 1998 documentary Pain Is, Elfi Mikesch and Monika Treut's 1985 S&M drama Seduction, the Cruel Woman, and Kirby Dick's 1997 documentary Sick, the Life and Death of Bob Flanagan, Supermasochist. Ethan, Jetta, how are you both doing?
Great.
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me. Well, actually, thank you for having us both, because Jetta and I, we've known each other a while, but we've never recorded together. We've been on holiday together. We've never recorded together.
Oh, wow.
That is true. We've seen each other in person.
Yeah, we've shared a hug, but we've never shared a recording studio. So I feel like this is an appropriate time to change that.
Aw.
Absolutely.
First time for everything.
Yeah, it's quite unusual.
And I haven't met either of you in person, and I'm sad about that, but I think one day it will happen.
Sure.
Okay.
That's up to you to decide.
Right, that's true.
Yes.
Everyone can come to New York. New York
absolutely.
is easy to plan travels to.
Oh, no, absolutely.
I might wait a little while to go back to the States for political reasons. I am in Canada.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
Yeah, we should really be going to Canada.
I was going to say, not it's travelable to, but do you want to? Is perhaps the more astute question at this point in time. But we're not really here to talk about current political news. We're here to discuss sort of the intersections of pain, pleasure, and disability, I suppose, because that's where at least two of these films interconnect. Because it started with a conversation between you and me, Bob, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We had been exchanging emails, and it was to do with your appearance on Watch This List, where you talked about Oshima.
Right.
And we were talking about In the Realm of the Senses. And we had a back and forth about that. And then we were talking about what sort of material we wanted to do for another podcast episode, because I know you really wanted me on. And to be fair, I wanted to be on again as well. And it was a case that we went, well, you said, well, what about Sick? And I went, yeah, I'd heard of it, but I'd never seen it. So I thought this would be perfect.
Right. Yeah.
And then,
Well, just to add further context to that, the reason why I initially brought up Sick, the Life and Death of Bob Flanagan, Supermasochist, was because it was watching the documentary before seeing In the Realm of the Senses that gave me a specific perspective to view In the Realm of the Senses, by one where I found a little bit more romance than you had, Ethan, and Amy, and maybe Jetta. I'm not really sure. Oh, so you also didn't find any romance in it.
No.
So I did see quite a lot of romance in that film. And it's because I watched this documentary about Bob Flanagan and his mistress, Sherry, is it? Sherry, right? And seeing their romance as alienating as it is to someone who really has no experience with that kind of experience, really. It did kind of give me a context to view In the Realm of the Senses by, and to see how maybe sometimes romance isn't as black and white as you might think. But I feel like if it's okay, we should maybe start with Pain Is, talking about that, work our way through Seduction, and then end on Bob Flanagan. Because I don't know about you guys, but I found the Bob Flanagan doc was the easiest film to really wrap my head around in terms of its themes. And which isn't to say it's a superior film by any means. I mean, the argument could be made for any of them, but I just found the other ones were a little bit more complex and layered.
I don't know if I'd say that, like, one more so than the other. I think they all do what they do in very interesting multifaceted ways. We can talk about all that.
I think I know what you mean though, Bob, because you're right, Jetta. They are approaching things in very distinct ways. But with Pain Is and Seduction, they're a lot more experimental, and they're operating a lot more on sort of.
That's fair, yeah.
I think the thing for me is, as I called in my review of Pain Is, it's one of the great interior films about pain. It's a film very much about if you've lived through pain, chronic pain, you will understand this film very intensely. Sick, by contrast, is a lot more sort of open-ended. It's a lot more giving you an insight into his world, I would argue. It's a lot more sort of, I wouldn't say feeding you information because that has negative connotations, but it's certainly a lot more descriptive. Whereas the Dwoskin is a lot more seemingly disconnected, which I know was your issue with it a little bit, Bob.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Well, if for those who don't know the documentary, if you can describe essentially what it is, and I feel like by my description of it, I might come off a little bit antagonistic about it, but it's essentially this documentarian Stephen Dwoskin is investigating different like forms of pain, different applications of pain. He speaks to people that participate in S&M, binding, things like that. He also talks to a weightlifter. Does he talk to a weightlifter or just films him?
He shows a weightlifter. He films a weightlifter.
Okay, right. Which looked extremely painful. And like I've been starting to work out, but getting into like lifting weights, and I never really did that too much before. So seeing someone do that, and because I've had an actual like pinch in a way of what that is, made it very visceral for me to see something like that, you know? But anyways, yeah, so he talks to all these different people, and you kind of get little snippets of it, and it's sort of glued together in a way that's is very up to your own interpretation, I guess is fair to say.
I think so. I mean, it's also, I think, affected by your personal subjective experiences of pain and what you can, if you can put yourself in another person's shoes, how does that affect your perception of what's being shown in the documentary? I mean, for me personally, because of my experiences with emotional and physical pain, it didn't come across as difficult to watch. I don't think it felt like maybe interior is not the word I would use. I would just say that I had compassion for certain descriptions of pain and understanding. And even if I couldn't personally understand it, I felt like it was interesting. It was something, food for thought, that I could certainly mull over. If that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah.
For me, I think for somebody who has suffered chronic pain and has been quite open about it in sort of like posts before, for me, it was definitely one where I understood it from both Dwoskin's perspective of trying to articulate something which has so many sort of descriptors around it, but is actually very hard to capture the nature of it, which is why I said interior, because it's not just about being somebody who suffers pain. It's also about a feeling which is fundamentally in the inside of one's body. I mean, as I say this, my arms are really quite painful. It happens. And I think I think this is the thing as well with what Dwoskin is talking about, is that this isn't just like the pinch of a nerve. This is like pure pain. This is the pain that is constant and long lasting, and how you sort of interact with that, which is why I think it rhymes beautifully with Supermasochist. I think for me, having that experience definitely provided me with a key to unlock like the arguments and the ideas that Dwoskin is going for, because Dwoskin himself was disabled. He had polio at a very young age, which meant that he was, which is also why I was so interested in bringing this on, because it's a film made by a disabled artist. And so in some of his a lot of his other films, he's very specific and open about his own not diagnosis, but experience of disability. So you often see him on crutches. It takes him a lot of time to use. I think he could barely use his legs. In Pain is that. Do you remember the sequence where there appears to be somebody with an oxygen tank, like an oxygen mask strapped on his face? That's Dwoskin.
A sleep apnea mask, yeah. Right?
Yeah, no, that's Dwoskin. He was in an iron lung for most of his life. That was oxygen that he needed. By the end of his life, he could barely move outside his own bed. And he was permanently strapped to one of those things by the end of it. So I thought that was a really lovely mea culpa by Dwoskin himself to implicate himself in that sort of pain situation.
Yeah. Well, how did you find that out? That information, like, did you just kind of Google it? And because he doesn't reveal any of that in the film.
No.
I already knew that, but that was because I studied him in grad school. I studied, there was a week when we studied his films.
Okay, yeah.
That's a good week in grad school, I'm not going to lie. That's a great
Yeah, we watched other clips, not from this film, but we saw several other films. So I had somewhat of a sense of who he was and what his interests were.
He's got very distinct interests.
I think knowing that context does help me in a lot of ways. But I do also think that might indicate, I mean, it kind of leads me into talking about the issue I had with the film, was that it felt like a film made by someone that knew the entire story, but was only giving us a little tiny bit of the story. And so the filmmaker has the full feeling of the story because they know it, and they just assume that what they're giving the audience, that small morsel, will work on its own. But it doesn't, because I didn't know he was disabled. I didn't know it was him in the iron lung. And in fact, the perfect moment that really, how would I put this? Like, displayed the lack of context and how it kind of transformed something into like being more numbing than informative, is the very opening scene of the documentary. Is this really long walk through a hospital with no real like music or dialogue or anything. You're just walking, going on forever. And then after 5 minutes, finally the voiceover starts. And I remember just thinking, wow, that was a choice. Okay, what's going to happen here? And but here's the thing, Ethan, now that you told me about his entire life in the iron lung, I can view that as having way more power. But at the same time, if I'm not told that, then how am I going to get that feeling from that? Do you know what I mean? And so that was sort of my whole issue with the whole film, was like, I feel like you as a filmmaker, you know the entirety of the pain, you know the entirety of the experience, but because you're only spoon feeding us these little snippets, I'm unable to put that together to get the full feeling that is intended. But that's just me, and it's amazing that you guys both got something more visceral out of it.
But I also don't know if that's because we already knew the backstory, so we can't necessarily unknow that and think, well, if I didn't know that, how would I react? I already knew it, so I automatically had that context, and so of course I was already keyed into, this is how he's thinking, this is what would be interesting to him. I understand why these are topics that would be so important to him. So that's already conveyed.
Right, true, yeah.
Yeah, I think I have two sides to it. I entirely understand your perspective, and Jet's right as well. I think that for myself, for me, it's a case that I'm informed by that, not only informed by his own sort of history and disability, but also people I know who've written about it and the various texts that sort of talk about his disability. Although there aren't many, actually. When I first discovered him, it was less to do with his disability and it was more to do with his voyeurism, which is a huge part of his cinema, is voyeurism and spectacle. He is, and Jetta, please correct me if I'm wrong, he is the person that Mulvey came up with the word, the male gaze, was almost exclusively coined for Dwoskin's cinema.
I think so, yeah.
Oh, wow.
But it's a much more complex thing than just watching as a level of subjectivity. However, with all that in mind, there's a part of me which says, Dwoskin was an artist. Dwoskin was a disabled artist. He does not. I think, firstly, he's trying to come up with something more universal. He's trying to express a universal understanding of pain in the film, one that goes beyond simple words such as disabled or chronically ill. And that, whether that's a success or not, I don't know, but that's definitely, I think, what he was going for. And the second thing is, there's a bit of me which goes, the film almost never needs to justify itself, I would argue. It simply needs to be. And in that respect, I really very much like it, because it's sort of being produced from this direct, unfiltered perspective of I'm disabled. This is what pain is like. I'm trying to, collate all these different ideas of how I can communicate what pain is to me by referencing it to a trapeze artist or a dominatrix. But that's my 2 cents anyway.
No, that makes sense. Yeah.
I mean, I felt like by including so many different examples, that's true. Like, it does not need to justify the existence of why all of these different lived experiences are interesting and valid. And eventually there is a sense of a universality, because we are seeing so many different things that so many people can experience. And even though only one person may experience this one particular thing, put all together, there are so many different aspects of those experiences that we can find some way of relating to. So yeah, I didn't feel either like it was so interior and so narrow that only someone who had been through that one thing could know it. I feel like on some level we can all get a sense of what this means and why there's meaning.
So a question then that I want to pose to both of you is that, and in regards to this film, is, do you think that it's sufficient enough to talk about pain as being pain, or do you think it's necessary to talk about pain as being, how do I put this? Pain in the context of, I don't know how I'm trying to put this.
I see what you're trying to say.
Pain is okay. Like pain as in the context of like your life when you don't have pain versus the times in your life when you do have pain. Because I think as I was saying earlier, like that was my issue, is that I found everyone was really fascinating, but I didn't get a strong sense of what their pain was, because I didn't get a strong sense of what their lack of pain was. Do you know what I mean? Like we're only talking and witnessing these people in the act of their pain, but we're not getting to see like their day-to-day life. So then each subject becomes like strictly the spectacle, And so for me, that isn't enough. Or at least that's what the conclusion I came to. But it sounds like, is that enough for you guys, just to see someone talking about just their pain and not talking about like what they do outside of that?
That's a really interesting question, actually. And the answer to me, I am going to butcher a little bit of sort of postmodern thought and ironically jump a little bit ahead to sort of thinking about things. There's the quote that starts Seduction, which is from Baudrillard, and the idea of sort of like seduction as an illusion. And sort of Baudrillard's writing, and again, people can correct me if I'm wrong, is often about how in a sort of a postmodern era, sort of the signs and the signifiers are almost divorced. We live in this sort of like post-real space. And I think for me, at the very least, I don't mind it as such, because those snippet moments, because it allows me to reflect, it allows me to interpret the idea of the pain being described by these people and then relate it to my own experience of the pain. In that respect, it creates a very empathetic space for the viewer to try and impart their own understanding of pain. Of course, it's a double-edged sword, because if you don't have that knowledge of exhausting pain, like really bone-seepingly deep pain, it's really hard to get into. but I actually think it works very well. And I don't think I can understand why you might see it as a spectacle. And a spectacle is a good thing to talk about when we get to Seduction. But yeah, it's one for me where it worked, basically.
Mm.
I mean, I think of it in terms of those snippets are slices of life, and I find those really interesting, worthwhile. Spectacle to me, it does have a negative connotation, right? Like, I'm not thinking of these moments in terms of exploiting the pain. I think if these people chose to take part in the documentary, it's because they feel like this is something very important to highlight. And so maybe it's taking it at face value, but I take so seriously what these people have experienced and what they are saying about it. Like the partner who talks about the emotional pain of seeing what his partner is going through. That is such a powerful moment for me in the film. And that's not something that I can personally relate to as someone who's never been in a relationship, but it's something that I understand in terms of understanding human emotion, understanding compassion. There are things that I can feel without having personally lived through them. So I think, whatever your personal experience is, you can find a way in. And so I felt very deeply for a lot of those segments.
That briefly, I'll just say that segment where it is the partner talking about the seeing their partner in pain. That one is a very hard one to watch if you've experienced that, or indeed, it's very much a mirror of that scene at the end of Supermasochist, which we'll get to.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely.
I think where that is a lot more in the moment, shall we say, where this is a lot more sort of abstracted. But even then, I think that it has the language that he uses feels very familiar. I'll just say that. Yeah.
Definitely.
So, talking about spectacle kind of made me think of something else. I touched on it a little bit in my review on Letterboxd, but because it has this almost like collage sort of nature to it, of like packaging together all these little vignettes that are based around, fairly, I guess we could say shocking. I don't think that's like a stretch to say, but there is quite a lot of shocking imagery. It did make me think a little bit of like a Mondo documentary. Are you too familiar at all with something like that?
Sure, yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's almost impossible to avoid. But it is something interesting to me that it's, as Dwoskin, he must have been familiar with Mondo films. And it's one of those things where, putting together the documentary, was he at certain points going, okay, well, this is maybe getting a little bit salacious, but maybe this is getting towards something deep. And then, no, I got to scale this back here because now we're getting a little too Mondo. Do you know what I mean? Like, is that something at all that's kind of gone through your head while watching it, or something that maybe you could speak to that? Because it seems fairly tasteful, but at certain points I could see someone enjoying it from that completely visceral place of like, whoa, this is crazy.
I mean, a viewer could do that, but I don't think that he made this film at all for any sense of shock value, and I don't think it would have occurred to him to change something because somebody who's not sensitive to it couldn't handle it, or would be, watching it for some other reason that wasn't just out of interest and compassion and curiosity. If someone wants to watch it just to get off, that's their choice, I guess.
Right.
But
you're going to be
I don't
sorely
think
disappointed.
Yeah. Well, there's different tastes for everybody, but I don't think Dwoskin was trying to. I don't think he was trying to shock anyone. I think he was being very honest in everything he was choosing to put in the film, because obviously, how he edited it together with his editor, those are all choices. And so I think he believes in everything he was doing, and he wouldn't have put it in if he felt like it wasn't necessary.
And that's right down, actually, I think, and I know exactly where you're coming from, because one of the areas I think for you, which you highlighted in your review, Bob, was the footage of dead bodies. And I'm pretty sure they're bodies from I'm pretty sure they're from concentration camps. They're and that is obviously pure Mondo bait. That sort of stuff would be used by people like though I don't think he ever used it. It's like Jacopetti would use that sort of thing, that sort of atmosphere. Then again, and Jetta, I think you've seen a lot more Dwoskin than I have. Well, at least in clips. He's always skirting around. Some of his films skirt around this sort of. It's the voyeurism, arguably. It's the interest in voyeurism. I'm not sure what you would think there as well, in the sort of the idea of the sort of the spectacle and sort of the spectator being part of that gaze.
Well, I am interested in seeing the film he made. I think it was in the early 80s or maybe in the 70s. He made a film that was set in a strip club, right? Didn't he? Wasn't that one of his famous films? Or am I wrong?
He might have done. It sounds like something he would have done. Yeah.
I would be interested.
And sex work do interconnect.
I would be interested to see a film that was more specifically on women's bodies and whether that sense of gaze affects that specific content. I didn't feel that really in this film, but maybe in others.
Yeah, going back to what you're saying, Ethan, though, about the footage of the dead bodies, you did remind me of that, because that was maybe the moment I felt where it was starting to get a little tasteless, showing that footage, which was extremely grim. And then it would cut to, I believe it was a man singing a song or something.
Yes.
Yeah, which I don't know. It took me a minute to kind of put it together, because I was at first like, is it because, the acoustic guitar playing is maybe hurting his fingers, or is it because he's singing from like a deep pain? Is that what the juxtaposition is here? And it just felt a little bit, I just feel like that kind of footage is a little hard to throw into a different context. Let's just say that. I feel weird about using something like that outside of a historical context, unless it is, how does it, not unless it is for shock value, but I feel like people will do that. And maybe that was a point where I started to wonder, like, is he trying to just shock us by showing that?
That wasn't my perception, but I also have a very different personal reaction to seeing that kind of footage, because I've watched a lot of Holocaust documentaries. This is something that is just like part of family interest. And so, I also come from the perspective of we can never forget that. And so
absolutely,
as horrible as it is to watch, I also feel like for me, it's never shock value. It is a recognition of history when I see that. As difficult as it is to see, I don't, unless I feel like the filmmaker is doing something so blatantly grotesque in including it, which I did not feel from the inclusion in this film, I feel like I can watch that because I have to watch it. It's like a need to see that.
Yeah. I think that's the best way to phrase it, frankly, is that I would almost argue, and lovely is the wrong word, but there's a very insightful quote about Alain René's Night and Fog, which is, for me, one of the bar none most affecting and one of the best films on the subject. And it talks about how there's a sequence where a tractor plows its way through a field of dead bodies. It's an earth mover. And it talks about how in that moment the bodies are rendered sickeningly alive. The corpses are rendered sickeningly alive by their motion. And I think that while it is quite an abstract use of the sequence by Dwoskin, one could argue that it's a way of reminding us that these are in fact bodies as ours, that in the moment of death experienced extreme pain and terror and agony. And in that respect, it's a very contemplative moment, and I think quite a powerful moment in that respect. That's at least, I think, building off from what Jetta was saying.
Yeah. No, I respect that. Yeah. I think to be fair, because I was kind of struggling from the get-go, I probably didn't have the right mindset for the whole film. You know how it is when you're not on board necessarily right away with something, you end up kind of looking at everything from that point on with a little bit overly of a critical mind. So I think that's the problem. And I hate when that happens. I'm always looking for that moment to pull me back in. And I think it's just such a, like, to be fair, and to me, this isn't an insulting word, but it is a demanding film. I think that the lack of music, the slowness of it, it is somewhat of like a dry and academic sort of investigation. And again, these are all things that in some other instances I've absolutely loved, and that kind of experience can just totally bowl me over. But yeah, I think as the film went on, I got a little too critical of it, which leads me to the ending then, which I found it was kind of sobering in a way of like, oh wait, so you're admitting that can't really sum this all up, like I did appreciate the honesty there.
I like the fact that he's just like, there is a point where he cannot articulate it. It's a very noble moment to be like, yeah, I'm limited by my own understanding. And in an attempt to be as sort of exterior as possible, he only emphasizes his own interiority of that pain, which is why the word interior is so important to me. Because while pain is a universal experience, it's experienced in individual ways each time, based on the context and based on the person. One bit that always comes to mind in that respect, and I actually do appreciate that he brings it in, is the interview he has with a woman who's going through menopause, and she is describing how painful that is. Now, I'm aware that that's not the case for all women, but I really appreciated the fact that he decided to bring that in and basically just let her speak for a fairly long, uninterrupted take about how it feels. And then he asks, like, how does it feel? What does it feel like? I really, that I thought, even when he's not able to get a full answer for the question, he manages to illuminate some very important moments of pain, shall we say.
Well, also, I mean, the fact is there is no one way to sum up the entire experience of pain because there is no one universal pain. But there are many different parts, many different aspects of pain, ideas, sensations that we can somehow relate to, and piecing it all together, we come to an overall understanding. But it is also interesting to have included the menopause part because there are so many kinds of pain that women typically experience, things that we may go through that maybe men are not familiar with or don't want to know about or afraid to ask about. And so there are certain things that I think are incredibly useful to have had in that documentary. And it made me think about documentaries about periods. It made me think about birth control. It made me think about all kinds of things that women may go through, which can be considered shameful. They shouldn't talk about it. And so there are so many different kinds of pain that can be chronic, could be experienced just for a short period of time, but change your life. So it just made me think a lot about my own experiences of friends, things that I've heard about if I've not personally gone through them. So there is certainly, as someone who used to experience severely debilitating cramps that like took me out for days at a time, a week at a time, horrible pain, to go through that kind of pain and bleeding for, 20 years is like, you're supposed to power through it. You're supposed to not think about it. It's not supposed to stop you. There are interesting ways in which pain is supposed to be minimized and never discussed and just, like brushed aside. So there are a lot of different things to think about in watching that documentary. And I'm glad that he highlighted what he did.
Yeah. To what you were just saying, Jetta, you just made me think of something my wife said to me about how, as much as, having periods is such a debilitating thing and so painful, the idea of one day, like it disappearing is also kind of a pain in itself, like that loss of like, oh, and now I don't have that anymore, and I think that is kind of a fascinating, which leads me to think that I think maybe the thing that really I would want to change about this is to turn it into like a series or something, because there's just so much to explore. And I think even an episode just on the pain of women, going through menstruation, everything like that, to me is a documentary in itself, just as like a documentary on the pain of like weightlifting could be, or the documentary on pain of, you know what I mean? Like this to me, it felt very much like a greatest hits reel at times. But there's still so much. That sounds so terrible. Sorry.
Well, that's not how I would have phrased it.
Greatest hits.
Greatest pains of all time.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that's the thing. It just felt I wanted more, and I guess that can be a good thing, and sometimes that can be a bad thing. So that's just where I landed on it. But yeah, I'd like to see more of his documentaries and maybe circle back to that one. The one you mentioned about, was it a strip club or sex workers? That sounds kind of interesting.
Well, I'd have to look it up again. Was it the one called As Is? Do you remember that, Ethan? Is that the title of it?
Potentially.
Or is that
the one I've seen is Outside In, which is a very very funny, occasionally sad film about him navigating his own disability in terms of sex and sort of his sexual relationships with women, which is I saw earlier this year and was very, very impressed by. It's both very, very, it's very, very, funny is the word that comes to mind. There's a few quite funny slapstick sequences that come to mind, and and it's also the thing which always comes to mind as well is that it's evident that he's a very attractive man not in terms of perhaps his physicality, his traditional physicality, but the sort of the force of will he generates by simply doing as much as he does in the state that he's in, so to speak, really appeals, I think, and has evidently demonstrates an erotic charm. So that's what I've seen and really love. And to be honest, while he was a filmmaker who was reluctant to exclusively label himself as a disabled filmmaker, those are the ones which interest me most for obvious reasons as a scholar and as a person.
Yeah.
Also, wasn't Dwoskin, besides what we already discussed of him being in the film, wasn't he also in the segment with the dominatrix? That was him as well, right?
That's him.
So as far as like his erotic life being a part of his filmmaking, that's in this one too.
Yep.
The film about the strip club is Dine Ammo.
Oh, okay.
It's 2 words, but it's like dynamo, but as 2 words.
There's a few people on Letterboxd. Zainab is one, and Scylla, who or Chilla, I think is how her name is pronounced. She will probably tell me off getting it wrong. Are both huge fans of that film. Both huge fans.
It sounds great. Yeah. Well, I'd like to use the attractive man thing as a segue into Seduction, the Cruel Woman, because it stars Udo Kier, who's a beautiful man.
Very.
Man. Yeah, this is just a complete aside, but I've always wanted to start a hardcore punk band called Udo Kier because it feels like it would be such a good band name.
I would be very impressed if you did.
Yeah.
He has such mesmerizing eyes.
It's the eyes, yeah.
He always reminds me of a frog or a space alien, but never in a way that's repulsive. It weirdly works for him. There's
okay.
It's a sort of a saucer-like unsettling quality, yet somehow it draws you in, weirdly.
Well, I always thought when he was a little younger, maybe in the early 70s, he could have done like a Conrad Veidt biopic, right? Like he had a certain look to him. Maybe it's the green eyes. Like he's a little short, but he could have done that. Could have worn heels.
Yeah.
Look, he's a short king.
He's not too, he's not too short. I think he's like 5'10". He's not 6'3", but that's okay.
5'10" is above average. 5'10" is above average.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, we missed a real good opportunity. We should have had something like that because two interesting guys having Udo Kier play Conrad Veidt. Movie magic.
Touche. That's a very good point.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting film. I really enjoyed this one quite a bit.
Good.
It just for even like the aesthetic of it, like the set design and the staging and everything. It had a very off-kilter kind of surreal approach to it. And it wasn't like overly clear what was going on at times. It was a little hard to figure out, but I like that about it. I think it gave it more strength in a way. But yeah, what was it that that made you suggest it, Jetta?
Well, I've been fascinated by it for years. I don't remember exactly when I first saw it, but I feel like it was probably around 10 years ago.
Mm,
I was just in a mindset of buying a lot of different movies. I had a gigantic DVD and Blu ray collection of films by women directors, and so that was just one of the ones that I bought.
mm,
And I found it fascinating because I mean, I'm often drawn to movies where it's not totally clear what's going on, there's ambiguity. You couldn't
mm,
necessarily easily dissect the plot, but the mood of it is so striking, the atmosphere, it's just intoxicating.
totally.
So I love the look of it. I love the aesthetic. I love the Dutch angles. I love the blue lighting. I think
Mm,
visually it is so interesting. And I also like that you do not always fully understand the motivations. Wanda is an enigmatic, mysterious person. You can have some sense, you can have some interpretations, but she will never fully open herself up, ever.
yeah.
So I find that really compelling. And also, talking about Udo Kier, this is such a subtle role for him. I mean,
In
when
a
you think
way.
about Udo Kier performances and the ability he has to go over the top, and we're talking about a character with great obsession, he is
Hmm.
so comparatively muted. I don't know if it's because it's a German film. I don't know if it's because it's a two women directors. I don't know exactly what it is about this particular film that is so totally different from most of the other work he's done, but I think it's just such an interesting challenge for him compared to other
Mm,
things he's done. And so there's so many reasons. And Mechtild Grossman's voice, which is so, just
it's
hypnotizing.
cool. Yeah.
Everything I think works
Yeah.
together for me to just be so, I don't know, it's unforgettable to me. And it's a film that I feel a lot of people have not heard of. Maybe they're not familiar with Monika
No.
Treut. I think maybe this is like, maybe someone who's interested in queer German film history would be aware of it. But and I've seen other
Yeah.
documentaries by her, so I already know her other work. But I just feel like there's some movies where I want to like shout from the rooftops, you have to see this, even if I
Hmm.
can't fully explain why you should, or if you wouldn't maybe see things from my perspective. It's like, oh, you got to watch it and you have to tell me what
Yeah.
you think, and then we can kind of, go over what we both feel.
I could see Mondo Macabro or a similar Blu-ray company putting this out and kind of getting like a resurgence for it.
Hmm.
Before we go too deeply into any kind of analysis, Jetta, do you mind just describing the plot if you can? I know
How
I'm
dare you?
almost just. I know.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm fascinated. I want to hear what you have to say.
What is that Ken Russell tagline? Don't say it, see it, or like, isn't there some? Is that
Mm,
Tommy?
Tommy. It's Tommy.
Yeah.
okay. Okay.
So something like that. So Wanda, as played by Mechtild Grossmann, which is my best German accent, um, she is a dominatrix and she has many other people in her collective. But I think it is not just really, I mean, it's partly about her relationships with other people in the collective, but really mostly about Gregor. To me, that is really focused on Udo Kier's obsession because there are other people around her, but I think his obsession. That's the most interesting thing about the film. But you can also look at the other relationships and how does she treat these people and can you make sense of it? Is it at all fair? Does she have any real emotional connection or any ability to feel emotion? Um, Again, it's a film that doesn't have easy answers. So, to what extent you think she is feeling anything or blocking everything out? Has she ever felt anything in the past? It seems to me like some of her relationships, like with Justine, were different in the past, and now they are something changed.
Mm,
So, it is a question for me of how has a person changed over time, and will she change at all in the future? I don't think so. Um, so there is a lot to contemplate as far as how have these experiences changed her. I would not say warped. I think that is a very negative word, but how has her work altered the way that she views human relationships? Are these people still people to her? Are they more like pawns in a chess game? Because I think for her, a lot of her reactions, her interactions are a game. So there's
mm.
there's kind of like a starting point for what we would discuss, I think.
It's such a. It's a very. Okay, because I remember how I became aware of this, Jetta, was through your reviews, but also because of Dogs Don't Wear Pants.
Yes, a movie that I
Mm.
famously could not stand.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I haven't
Whereas,
seen it.
whereas it's a film I really enjoy. I think that it's a very And so I think I had that in the back of my mind when I was watching this, because of your championing of this specifically. And I was trying to sort of find the interconnections between the two really here. It's a very sort of, the thing is, I saw it yesterday and I'm almost struggling to find words for it, because it's more of an experience than anything else. It doesn't feel like a narrative film so much as a series of tableau, which is appropriate considering that what Wanda puts on are a series of tableau that aren't. The thing for me is they're not traditionally erotic. They are based on a philosophy that is more about performance and anticipation within performance, rather than any sort of fulfillment or release, or not therapeutic per se, although obviously therapeutics and S&M have a relationship in of themselves. But it's definitely more like sort of subordinate to the spectacle. And it's about these sorts of spectacles sort of slipping in and out of each other, really, where you're never quite sure what is a performance, what is real. Gregor is absolutely real. Gregor seems to have unfortunately committed the cardinal sin, which is that he's broken the line between performance and reality in a way which is, to me, understandable, but he goes about it in a really cat-handed way, and he causes his own downfall, arguably. So it's such a strange film, and quite an alien film to me. Very alien, I think, at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I'm reminded a lot of Fassbender. You know, there are characters in Fassbender films who may act in ways that don't feel fully like people. They feel like performances of people. Sometimes there are Fassbender performances where everything feels fully dimensional. It's really fully human, like Ali Fear Eats the Soul. I would say that's an obvious example. But there are other films where it feels like a performance on a stage. It is very carefully designed in a way to look a certain way and sound a certain way, but maybe doesn't really feel like human behavior as we might consider it. So, you know, I think a lot about that. I think about the performance, the outfits, the makeup, the lighting. We are watching the design of Wanda, the way she wants to look. And it oftentimes feels more like you're looking at a painting than, you know, like a woman moving about in the world. And that's very interesting too, because she's designing that herself. She is looking that way of her own choosing. And so that's also interesting too. I mean, as Gregor is falling apart toward the end, he's really going through it. She is just so perfectly composed, almost like a wax figure. So I think that's really interesting too. Like how does this feel? Can we at all consider this real, or does it just feel like a series of paintings or stories written?
Well, what happens with Gregor kind of makes me think about another film that would have actually fit in pretty well in this episode, Hisayasu Sato's Muscle, which Ethan, you've seen.
Yes.
Jetta, I don't believe you've seen that one.
I know of it.
Yeah, it's basically like a gay S&M film. And so with that film, what's really interesting is this idea that if your relationship is based off of pain as pleasure, how do you know when that ever ends, when that stops, and how far can it go in terms of like heartbreak? What with it ever actually exiting the game of their S&M. And so with Gregor, sorry, that's really convoluted way of explaining it. But with
That's
Gregor,
okay.
it was a situation where, you know, like he broke the cardinal sin of falling in love. But was that his intention to experience the next level of pain? Because it just brought something that I think he would have been aware of, really, you know. And it's sort of like he and Justine were both so desperate for more of Wanda, but it always felt to me like, but maybe they are like thriving in that desperation, like maybe this level of pain is just the next level of their pleasure in a way. Like, can we ever really define that? Do you guys know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, to me, it feels like it's a compulsion. It's like a snowball. Once it starts rolling, they can't stop it. So, even if they might not consciously realize it, I feel like they're locked in. Like, they couldn't get out if they wanted to. That is how deeply the desperation has its hooks in.
Yeah, yeah. But then, it's almost like not only can it go as far as possible in terms of what's been laid out previously, but even in terms of it going further, it can keep redefining itself,
Mm.
and that's where I think all of a sudden heartbreak is involved. Oh, you fell in love? Well, now love is another way for us to hurt each other and to find pleasure in that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You
I'm
both
thinking
seem a
about
little
it.
okay.
I'm thinking about it.
If you see Muscle, Jetta, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, because Muscle really
I
nails
mean,
that.
Muscle has that ending.
Yeah.
Muscle has that very specific ending, where the submissive partner sort of does something sort of almost indescribable to demonstrate his affection for the dominant partner, and it ends in this incredibly moving sequence, sort of set to Coil. I'm pretty sure it's the Pasolini song, and that works. I mean, there's something sort of similar in here in terms of wanting to make the ultimate sacrifice, but I think for Gregor, there's something quite selfish about it. The thing for me about Gregor, which is interesting, is that I interpreted it as Gregor very explicitly not making a choice. I almost think he couldn't help it. There's a certain point where it almost becomes impossible to not develop feelings and emotions for someone else within the dynamic. At least this is my interpretation of it. And I think that he gets to that point and all he gets is Wanda's contempt. Whether that's because she fundamentally doesn't like emotions and prefers to have things in a perfectly aerated control, like a sort of an airless control rather, or whether it's because it's like, this is clearly not what we outlined when we put this entire contract together. I don't know. I can't comment on that. I just find it really interesting how how he sort of does what to me feels like the most logical next step in that sort of situation. And arguably, I think others are starting to feel it as well, not Justine, which is in itself a really lovely reference to Dessard, but to the shoe fetishist, who clearly is not happy with what's going on. You can tell that she's quite... She, I think, is the one who I felt the most connected to, her weird fantasy sequence aside, because it felt like somebody who was going, you do realize that none of this is okay. There's something unsafe about this. And she is constantly trying to articulate this to Wanda, not brilliantly, but she's trying to articulate there's something very wrong here to Wanda. And Wanda just doesn't want to listen to it. She's like, give me an aspirin, stop talking to me, I have a headache. And she's trying to push it away. And I think that for me, I think is arguably a sign that either Wanda doesn't want to deal with the emotions. But I think she doesn't want to deal with them, not that she doesn't have them. She just doesn't want to like bring them to the fore. And as long as she's in control, she doesn't need to deal with them.
Right, I'd say she is choosing to completely block everything out, and she will only do and say exactly what she wants. But this also kind of reminds me of, it's giving me sort of like PTSD flashbacks to things I've seen on dating apps where people will say intimacy without commitment or casual but consistent. And you can say that and you can try to make that a reality, but you can't always account for human behavior and reactions and whether someone develops feelings beyond whatever you have carefully laid out and say you want to have happen. So the idea that, there may be a contract, there may be an assumption, does not mean that that feeling will not change over time. And certainly it can be
Yeah.
one-sided. So, that is part of it too. The idea that Gregor can change how he feels. And the conflict is in, if the other person doesn't feel that way, how is he supposed to navigate that? And what will he do?
Mm. Yeah, I totally agree. The one-sidedness of that. It's like if you put that forth, saying, "Well, no, 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 this is what I asked for," you can kind of bring that up whenever you need to. You know what I mean? Like put a stoplight to, "Well, no, 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 we're not going to go further than that." Do you know what I mean? Like you're in control of it. And I think in the situation of the film, it's almost like everyone in there is sort of just like losing themselves to their desires and their drives and their lusts and everything. And yeah, I think it's just a matter of watching what happens when people don't stop themselves from jumping off the cliff in a way. You know what I mean? Like I keep going back to in the realm of the senses in a way of like this is what happens when you allow yourself to explore your desires beyond any reasonable sense of decency, or I don't know what the word is for that, but
No,
yeah.
decency comes to mind actually, because there's no sense of restraint. It's Wanda is in charge of things, but she's also,
There's no care involved,
yeah,
right?
there's no
There's
care.
no like compassion or
there's no
she's not
aftercare.
checking in. Yeah.
God, no. I think if anything, I think she finds that whole concept quite unpleasant, which I think whether that's an essential flaw of the film or whether that's just Treut and her co-director underlining that this is that what Wanda has created is a deeply unhealthy attitude and sort of milieu is up for debate. I personally think it's more likely the latter, that this is a very intentional underlining of someone who is going to burn through people no matter what she does.
But
I agree.
but that makes me think though, it's like if she does actually check in with everyone, wouldn't that be shattering the like sexual game that they've got going on? Like wouldn't that just shatter it if she just drops the act, and it just becomes this like sympathetic person? You know what I mean? Like at that point the game stops.
I think my concern with that is, sorry to interrupt you on this one, Jetta, is that is
Oh,
no. I thought,
I'll get to it.
Oh, sorry.
No, actually, no. I'd like you. In that case, I apologize. Please, you had something to say. I interrupted you.
Well, I mean, I think that, people who have this discussion first, as they should, understand where the lines are. They understand this is what we do in this context. And when we are not doing that, you can check in, you can find out how each other is doing. It's the communication part. If there's absolutely no communication, if there is no aftercare, if there is no sense of understanding that these are human beings, that's a problem. Right? Therein lies the issue.
Yeah, but to be fair, I don't think Seduction, the Cruel Woman, and what you're talking about are entirely the same thing. I think that the Seduction, the Cruel Woman is posing more of a fictional environment. It's not a documentary. Do you know what I mean?
I'm not saying that.
Of like how people conduct themselves in this like kink community. I think Seduction, the Cruel Woman is sort of like the furthest end of that fantasy. Like I think if you watch a lot of films that are like, porn or films that are depicting like a fantasy of it, the fantasy itself, I think, can go as far as it needs to, because reality is when you have to put these boundaries in place. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's why, to me, it's easier to assess Seduction, the Cruel Woman as a situation where all the boundaries are like vanishing, and that's just the way the film's going to go, and it's not like representing any kind of like realistic relationship of like S&M.
No, I get that.
Yeah.
What was the original question? I feel like we got away from what the question was.
Oh no, originally just saying, but at the point where she's checking in, doesn't that shatter the game? And
it would.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think I think my argument would be, though, the game almost, at least from my perspective, does need to be shattered sometimes, because it's impossibly unhealthy to live within that constant state of doubt, almost.
Right. But that is why it's also unhealthy in the film. That is why
Precisely.
there is so much misery and pain, because it is not being conducted in a, what we would assume to be, theoretically, potentially, we would want to be a healthy depiction.
Yeah. It'd also be kind of a boring movie, though.
Well,
Because,
yeah,
like,
then it wouldn't be a movie we would want to watch.
Yeah. It would, films need like conflict to them, right?
Well,
and I think,
it would not have the conflict that it has. It would just be a portrait. It would be a snapshot of these lives. That is a different movie. But this particular movie is about the conflict between these people who are just like at each other's, like, they're butting heads over how do they do anything that works with what everyone wants. So that's the interesting thing to me about it. If it were different, then we would be talking about it in a different way.
Yeah, exactly.
And also, I think, what we haven't really discussed is the fact that it is a film spearheaded by women, the fact that it has the directors who, besides Monika Treut, the co-director Elfi Mikesch is also the cinematographer, and of course there's also the editor Renate Merck. So, the feeling of there being so many women involved in making the film, besides it being transgressive as a queer German film from the 80s, I think, for me, when I watch it, a lot of the importance of it, the feeling of enjoying and being interested in what I'm seeing, is knowing the people who made it, and that they felt like this was an important statement to make. They're going against the grain of whatever would be considered a mainstream film. So that has a great impact for me.
I think something to add to that is the fact that Treut, at least, is openly lesbian, and this is a film wherein a great number of the emotional and sexual relationships are sapphic, which I think adds an extra dimension to the proceedings in that way as well, because there's an interesting gender commentary that could come from Gregor's demands, shall we say, for exclusivity with Wanda, that could very easily, and I think probably quite productively, be read as a heteronormative capitulation. But what he's putting forward is fundamentally very, in a number of ways, could be seen as quite regressive. For all of his understandable, perhaps, falling out of the game, what he's offering appeals not to Wanda, not because it's openly emotional, potentially, but also because it's very constrictive, and it would place her in a potential social position where she has lost her power and has lost the ability to act in the way that she feels most comfortable in. And so there's a multitude of different potentialities swirling around in this relationship, or the relationships that we see.
And how different would this film be if it were not made by the directors who made it? If a man directed it, if it were a straight man, if it were a man who identified as queer, how different are the perspectives when made by different people? So I absolutely think about that too.
Treut has made at least one more film. At least one documentary didn't do it for love. Virgin Machine is about a roughly similar subject matter in terms of lesbian S&M. Is that correct, Jetta?
Yeah, it's another very good film. It's sort of a hybrid fiction and nonfiction. But yeah, it definitely does also include that in its depiction of the relationship. And also Female Misbehavior, that's another documentary she made. I think it has interviews with Camille Paglia. So also interesting. I mean, she's clearly interested in the woman's perspective. I think if Seduction worked for you in whatever context, in whatever way that you felt it made some sense, or you would like that it didn't make sense, I think checking out more of her films, especially Didn't Do It for Love, that one is really great. I think you'll get a lot out of them.
Yeah, they sound great. And it's really interesting that the directors, or at least one of the directors, is that right? Did they always work together, the two women?
I think Elfi Mikesch might have been a cinematographer on other Treut films. I think she might have also been on Virgin Machine.
Okay, cool. So they did these documentaries, or at least like hybrids, and then
Hmm.
went on to make this fully fictional film. And it's almost like they took their experiences on from those documentaries to feed into making something that is almost like it's interesting. It's like all that experience sounds like it gave them more permission to play around with these boundaries and play around with these kind of like roles and games and everything.
Well, I think actually Seduction came first. I think this was the first of their
Hmm.
films together, or at least the first feature
Oh,
film.
okay, my bad.
So
So
this is the
yeah.
jumping off point.
Oh, okay, that's cool. Well, I mean, sometimes it can work in reverse like that. Like you have that idea and you're like, well, now I want to see what actually can happen in the real world with these things. So that's
Hmm.
cool. Yeah. Speaking of documentaries, I mean, it's not much of a good segue, but
No,
moving
let's
on
do
to
it.
moving on to our final film, Sick, the life and death of Bob Flanagan, Supermasochist. So this is like quite a bit of a cult film. I'd heard about this one for a long time. I think it pops up in a lot of like lists for, most disturbing films and things like that, which is kind of unfortunate that it's maybe been a little maligned as this like super shocking documentary when it actually has a lot of heart to it, I would say,
A
and
lot
is
of
quite
humor.
a lot of a lot of
Mm.
humor, a lot of heart. It's kind of a beautiful story, at least not visually beautiful for a lot of different reasons, but yeah, like what did you both think of it?
Well, the first thing I wanted to ask, because I have certain views on, the idea of what I would call censorship. You asked
Okay.
if there was anything that we felt we would have to fast forward through. And my
Okay.
personal policy is when I start a movie, I absolutely will not stop it. If it's like for me, it's all or nothing. I will either watch the entire thing or stop watching it. And then I will, probably not write about it because I'll feel like I didn't fully experience it. But
Fair enough.
um, that doesn't have to be what anyone else thinks. Everyone can do what they want. My feeling is if I've made the commitment to start watching it, I have to watch it. And if there's anything that's difficult, I have to work through why was it difficult and what did I think
Mm.
about it and kind of sit with that. I didn't personally find anything. I mean, I don't want to say this in a way that makes it sound like I have no feelings. I didn't find anything impossible to watch in this film
Okay.
because it felt necessary.
Totally.
Even the very ending, which is obviously like that's an upsetting thing to watch. Spoiler alert: someone's death. That's not an easy thing to watch, but it feels necessary, integral to the film. So I wasn't going to shut it
Absolutely.
off at that
Mm.
point. So I just wondered, was there anything in particular besides the very end, obviously, that you felt concerned that we would have to skip?
I think like seeing someone nail their penis like so up close like that is pretty rough. I don't think
Not
it's
for me.
crazy. Oh,
Sorry.
okay. No,
I
I would say the same thing
That's the
if it was
interesting thing
like
to me. Yeah.
I think real not depictions, like real footage of someone self-harming is
Well,
generally like a rough thing for anyone
so
to watch. So I like to give people a heads
that's
up on that.
that's an interesting thing because I think also it's a question of he fully consents to doing it. And so
Sure.
for me, if I were watching someone being hurt by another person and they didn't consent to it and it is a violent assault on them, that is difficult for me. But,
Right.
given that that happens so late in the film and we've already watched everything else, it's like, okay, that is part of what he wants to do. That is his personal choice. That is something that brings him meaning. So, it's a very interesting thing to watch a film and think about the perception of this is too disturbing to watch, but why do other
Hmm.
people find that so disturbing? Because for me, it is, understanding the person, understanding why he does what he does.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't find that difficult at all, but it is a very interesting thing because I think there's also a perception that there is some content that women can't handle. And I think about that when I think about women watching movies and what are
Mm,
women too afraid to watch. And then there's also the perception of what could men not watch because they would be afraid of seeing that.
right.
And so I think there are a lot of different layers to, how are we supposed to interpret things and is it too disturbing, too disgusting? Because I think there are also certain things that we see in movies that are entirely fictional that are disturbing in a certain way, but this is real life. And is it
Yeah.
necessarily more disturbing when you know it's happening to a real person, but they're choosing to do it? So
Mm.
I don't know. There are a lot of layers to it. Not that I mean to laugh
Yeah.
about it, but I do just find it interesting because I just view it as this is a real thing that happened. And,
Yeah.
you know,
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
you
I
sit, you
think
sit
it
with
makes
that feeling.
Yeah, I think it makes sense that I would, inviting you on and say like, "Hey, watch this movie." Be like, "By the way, there's some shocking stuff in here." I think it's
Yeah, you
good
don't
to
have to
give
worry
people a
about that
heads
with
up,
me.
right? Okay,
Yeah,
good to know. Good to know.
but it is an
Yeah.
interesting thing also in terms of, if you are interested in that content anyway, and if you are
Hmm.
already primed to be okay with watching it, that is also very different from someone who's going to this movie cold and maybe
True.
entirely horrified and not prepared at all to see that. I think
Yeah.
if you go into it feeling like this is something I already know about, this is something I've already had some familiarity with in whatever
Mm,
way, whether it's something you've read about or something you've experienced, you're going to come at it from a different perspective than someone who is not at all involved in that community or has no interest, is disgusted by it maybe. So it's a different
right. Right.
perception.
Okay. Uh, Ethan.
To be honest, for me, this was a film where I already knew what I knew what the big first shock moment is, which is obviously him putting the nail directly through his penis. To be fair, I think although I think I was braced for that by the moment we saw him with the barbells within it anyway. In the earlier
Mm,
sequence, with the little bit of with the needle as well. So
Mm-hmm.
so the blood on the camera wasn't really as much of an unsettling event as I think. I think the thing is that for a lot of marketers, emphasizing the shock elements of a film are they think necessary in order to sort of get the punters in. But
oh, okay.
within its context, it does to echo Jetta. It just feels very normal. It feels almost. I almost feel would have felt a little disappointed had something like that not appeared. Considering, shall we say, considering usage of his genitalia in such a way is very explicitly part of the relationship between him and his mistress. It's like that's just
Mm,
what they do. That's just normal. It also makes sense in terms of having to give the context of Flanagan's relationship with his body, because obviously he's somebody with cystic fibrosis, um, which is a saying it's horrific is redundant. Frankly,
yeah.
it's a condition which it severely curtailed his life. He lived to about 40, 42, and that was
Mm-hmm.
considered exceptional.
Hmm.
When I was younger, I saw this is a very British cut. Blue Peter did a story on which was a sort of a news program for children. They did a story where they interviewed a young boy with cystic fibrosis, which is how I knew about it. And it was made very clear early on that this boy was going to not last beyond his 25th birthday, if that.
Mm,
Um, so it's a horrific. Here we go. It's this incredibly cruel twist of fate that also keeps your body in severe pain all the way through. I mean, the thing that comes up is that his mother talks about how he was under local anesthetic and they were having to remove pus from the space between his lungs at the age of 10, and he was screaming in agony. That is going to shape your attitude toward pain and by extension sexuality in a very dramatic way. So seeing the height of his performance effectively feels appropriate, I would argue.
yeah.
And also,
Mm,
he has such a sense of humor about
He
everything
does.
up until close to the end. I think that powers him through everything. It's
Mm-hmm.
discussed also in Pain Is the idea that humor is a reducer of pain. But even if it's not a reducer of pain, it is a way to manage it. It is a way to comprehend what is happening. And it's cathartic. Being able to joke about something, being able to use humor in how you experience even more pain by doing the performance art is its own kind of relief and release.
yeah.
And isn't it also so interesting, by the way, thinking about his parents, that his parents couldn't understand how could they not know this about him, how his mother says that, the father says it, they were so close. But if you think about what they're saying, they're talking about eating dinner together and they're talking about watching TV together. That's not the same thing as really being close to someone, that's being in physical proximity. That's not the same thing as really understanding their mindset.
Which brings to mind, sorry to jump in, which brings to mind the fact that his brother is not really mentioned when the film is discussed. The brother is gay, and the brother is gay.
He does talk about it, yeah.
Yeah, well, this is what I mean, is that when people talk about this film, the brother doesn't come up as much, but the brother is an important side character because he is gay in an era when this is after the AIDS crisis. Well, it's still within, but it's after that brief period where it's often considered as this sort of very intense public scrutiny is held to it.
Mm-hmm.
And you get the sense that even then there's like this level of surprise by this brother that the other brother had such an attitude towards sex that even he is surprised by. It's like there's this, the whole family feels fractured in places, as to be fair does the mistress's family.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Which is a very unsettling sequence.
Oh, yeah. I think with the mother saying, I never knew, like, why didn't I know? It's kind of a weird thing to me because I feel like, his space that he's acting in is his own sexual space. You know what I mean? Like, why would your family be involved in that space?
Right.
And I think the fact that he's turned it into a form of entertainment, maybe that's why, but they need to always remember it goes back to his sexual space. Like that is where it comes from, and that's his own space. And you're not going to be invited in that. As much as you might perform that for other people, that is still your own intimate space.
But there is always this baseline assumption of quote unquote normalcy until you say otherwise. So I think that's where the shock and horror come from, and the feeling of, but how could you be different than a normal child? How could you have something other than that going on? And because, again, the entertainment aspect, the spectacle aspect, it's difficult to comprehend wanting to put something that is not considered mainstream and normal out there for everyone to see. So that's where the mother is, I think, coming from with, oh my God, how could this be?
Something I'd like to talk about, though, is something that I briefly discussed, which is reading the reviews. A lot of people find Sherry, I believe is her name, the mistress who is effectively his life partner.
Yeah.
They are not. There's a few people who find her quite disturbing and quite unsettling.
I could definitely point to something.
It's a very unusual. When I say unusual, I feel like I've used this a lot because it's a slightly redundant adjective. But there is something about their relationship and her. I think I would have almost liked to have seen more about her, because while obviously it is about Bob, there's a lot that's going under the surface with her and her interactions with Bob that I feel is not explored. And that is a little frustrating sometimes, because the way you can interpret what Dick puts on the screen, Kirby Dick, specifically the director, as painting her as quite an ambiguous and not villainous, but certainly very unsettling presence. One who that you have to, I think, extend a lot of compassion to her in order to sort of stop it turning into, this is a really sick man being exploited by this particular woman, is at least what I felt about it.
What was the disturbing thing you guys were talking about? The thing.
Well, I know what I was going to mention. I don't know if it's what Ethan was going to say. I think
you mention it first, Jetta.
Well, for me, I think if we're thinking about the question of whether she's taking advantage of someone who is experiencing chronic illness, you have to assume that he wants what they are doing, that again, as they say, the contracts that they agreed to the kind of relationship they were going to have, at least in the beginning, we assume that he is not being taken advantage of throughout the film. But the most disturbing thing to me personally, which I felt was the most difficult thing to be witness to, is nothing physical. All those things are things they consented to. Those are things that they wanted to have happen. To me, it's the scene toward the end when he is clearly in such a state, physically and emotionally. He does not have strength. He doesn't have desire anymore. He doesn't want to continue right now in this moment in whatever she wants to take part in their relationship, and she just can't understand that, right? Like, she keeps asking from behind the camera, but why can't you still be submissive to me? She's whining over and over, why won't you do this? And he is ill. His body, his mind cannot sustain what she wants to do, and she seems unable to understand that. And so that, to me, is the most disturbing thing in terms of emotional connection. You know, she can't understand what he is dealing with, and that transcends whatever contract they signed in the early 80s, you know? Like, you can sign something and you can agree to something at a particular point in your life, but a body is going to change, especially with illness, age and illness, and all kinds of, and personal views, and anything can change you. And you don't have to be locked into whatever you agreed to years ago if your body and mind have changed. And she seems so unable to comprehend that. And it's not until he goes into the hospital, and I think she sees it and it really hits her, and she understands just how serious this is and how ill he is, that you see her reacting in that way, and it doesn't matter anymore, and she's just there for him. And that's when I think it feels real to her. But, you know, that goes into talking about emotional pain, not just physical pain.
Yeah. Ethan, is that the same spot you're thinking of?
There are two. That's one of the two, come to think of it. That one is a very hard one to watch because, I entirely agree with Jetta. It does seem like she's stuck on this rock. And you can frame it perhaps as these are two people who are trying to negotiate their emotional boundaries and sort of the limits of their relationship, which actually that entire conversation starts with him going, you do realize, like, we're close to breaking up. Like it's pretty much what he's saying. It's like, look, we both know it. We've been talking about this for a while. This seems to be the end of things. And I think in no small part it's because the disability has just, it sapped his drive. And as it would do, I think, near the end of life, where it's just like your body is so worn out. You can't do anything like that. And I think that, but I do think that she takes this very high-handed approach to it. There's also a sequence, there's a couple of things early on which I don't like. There's one tiny throwaway reference, and then there's the sequence where they're talking about, there's a lovely sequence early on where, midway through, where Flanagan meets this young woman with cystic fibrosis. She's about 17.
Right, Sarah Doucette.
Yes. Who I must admit, I did want to wonder what happened for her, frankly.
I looked her up. Yeah, she ended up living to, I think, 39. I think she died in 2016. So it was longer than she anticipated. Yeah.
That was something which definitely gave me pause for thought. But the reason I mention it is because there's this little bit after they've interacted and they've seen everything, and there's the very sweet sequence of Sarah's mum holding the massive black dildo, and she's like, oh, look at this, isn't this funny? Which is very sort of like endearing, where she starts talking about, like, oh, you know, we could have, you know, inducted her, you know, we could have done a little bit, making a fancy.
The joke goes on too far.
The joke, that's the problem, is I don't know how much of it is a joke.
Right.
Because there's an earlier sequence where she's talking about her earliest sexual experiences, and she phrases it as, yes, my mum kept, stopping me pulling the clothes off of the young boys in the neighborhood. And I was like, that in itself, either of those two sequences separately, less cause for me to sort of get my hackles up, but both of them together did unsettle me somewhat. And it spoke, I thought, to somebody who was, it felt a bit predatory and a bit dangerous to my liking.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And now I don't know how much of that is a certain moralizing from my perspective, But
Yeah.
it did provide me with this pause for thought where I felt, you can tell even that Flanagan is uncomfortable with it because he parodies it, he burlesques it as like what he thinks she wants is for him to be this like horrible slobbering pervert to corrupt
Right.
this
Yeah.
young woman who is very clearly a fan of his. Let's be honest, and there's a real power imbalance there, and that and she gets a bit upset by that, notably the mistress. So I feel that that's very interesting. That he's aware of like this is a bit fucked up, frankly. That's at least what I got. So that's why I can see where a lot of her obsession with control comes from, but that stuff was much harder to swallow.
Okay. Yeah, I think those are fair points. I think the only thing I'll say, I guess, in response to that is the scene towards the end. She is like a total asshole to him when he's like basically dying. But he does point out something that made me go, okay. He says you're stoned right now. And that did make me think, okay, sometimes people get into really stupid arguments when they're high, which I mean is not really an excuse, but I think it's very easy for an annoyance or a frustration to kind of like snowball into something really dumb and cruel, maybe if you are like very high. And so maybe that was the case. And I think that maybe by Kirby Dick putting that in to be like, hey, like things weren't always super happy between them and she kind of sucks sometimes. But then you see the ending and it kind of redeems her to some extent because I think she is there 100% for him when he is actually expiring. So, and that stuff was just, I mean, it's just funny. Like, I think the first time I saw this, I put this in my review of how, like, doesn't matter how much there is of footage of like him nailing his dick, the footage of him dying is like the most painful, hardest thing to watch, you know?
No, completely. It's the moment where she's like whispering, you know, I'm going to be here. I'm going to be here for you. You're going to wake up. We're going to be fine. So on and so forth. And how much she loves him. And it's very clear that his eyes have rolled back up into his head. That is horrific stuff. That is really horrific to watch. Really upsetting.
I would say for a while, she's probably doing her very best to ignore the reality of the situation, being stoned, not wanting to think about the realities of his illness and what his condition really means for the state of their relationship. I think it was one thing maybe when they got together to obviously not want to baby him, not want to treat him differently because of his condition, and want to do exactly what he wants and what they agree to because that is stronger than what seems like the setbacks, the debilitation. But when it gets worse, when it gets more intense and real, she doesn't want to think about it. She doesn't want to deal with it until it gets to the point where she has to. And then she realizes the reality of their bond and that transcends all the other petty things, that they really do want to be there for each other. And when he can't even consciously realize she's there, she wants to be there for him. So that, I think, is the powerful thing.
Yeah. Sounds like she might have like a bit of arrested development or something.
Yeah, that occurred to me.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to circle back to something interesting in terms of, the perception of shock value. In terms of thinking of the nailing scene as shock and as something horrific for someone to watch, I also wonder to what extent that's because we don't expect to see that happen with a man's body, right? Like, we expect blood, and we think about blood and difficulty and pain and all kinds of fluids from women. And so for me watching that, I'm thinking, well, this is normal for me. Like, I'm thinking about blood, I'm thinking about, like, periods, and not to make this all period-centric, but, the idea that, like, that to me is not a taboo thing, but for a man to do something involving pain, this is a pain he is creating for himself. This is not, putting the nail in, he's choosing to do that. Sorry, my phone is ringing. I'm just going to ignore that.
Yeah.
That's a choice. And so I also think of that in an interesting way in terms of like pain that you're controlling and you're creating, and yet that is perceived as a horrific thing. So I don't know if that also affects, what people think about that, but
I'd like to expand on that a little bit, not in terms of like both the subject, but also the scope we're talking about here. And I think that it actually might fit in nicely, Jessica, because I think it's as much about male, female understandings of blood and the object, the locus of blood. I also think it's about genitals and genital mutilation. I think more, at least for me, more strongly, that is where it's coming from. And the anxiety, you could argue that there is something to be said for the penis as some sort of like, shall we say, symbol of power, and the idea of it being, and it being modified or mutilated in some way is in itself unsettling and sort of troubling. And I think that certainly Flanagan's masochism is a challenge to that certain sort of, shall we say, masculine normativity. I do also think it's simply about it's also as much about the conceit of just simply genitals as objects. They're often seen as these sensitive objects to not be touched, which again Flanagan talks about in relation to his Catholic upbringing. And so I think that there is something to be said there for the way that they are constantly being reshaped and potentially damaged, notably, by the performances that he undertakes.
And a perception of shame if it is not intact, if it is not perfect, if something happens to it, or if you choose to do something to it. We could be talking about piercings as well as the nailing part. Is that so horrific to view that you can't even fathom it? Because to me, I look at that and I think, well, he wants those piercings, he chooses to use them, and so I just watch that and I think that's another interesting aspect of how he chooses to live his life.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah.
Seconded.
Yeah, I think for me, watching kind of any genital mutilation, regardless of gender, is always going to kind of affect me, always be kind of disturbing to some degree. But I understand it's not always going to affect everyone the same way. I just think it is something worth mentioning to people. Like I think self-mutilation. I was saying this earlier. Self-mutilation, like real documentation of it, is something that can be hard for a lot of people to view for whatever reason. So I think it is just like universally shocking to some degree. I do see what you're saying though about how there is maybe an aspect of it that's like, oh well, we're so used to like women being the source of like having blood coming out of their genitals and stuff. So that's something I never really thought about it before. That is interesting. Yeah.
Maybe if you never had to think about it, this is also like having a woman's perspective is why, because these things are baked in. And so I always wonder, to what extent I think about this all the time. And there are oftentimes things that, if I bring up in conversation, a male friend may say, oh, I never thought about that. That never occurred to me because they never had to think about it. And, I do think it's interesting to what extent there are basic aspects of everyday life, things that are supposed to be normal and routine that are simply never thought about by other people who never have to live those things. So.
The one thing that comes to mind there is, very briefly, is that also extends to chronic pain and disability as well. I think that's something very germane there, which is also probably why pain is, for me, is such a deeply sort of, I understand that very intensely, because it's that level of, well, I have to think about that on a daily basis, It's obviously it's quite different to what you're describing, Jetta, in terms of blood and sort of menstruation and the reproduction. But for me, at the very least, the idea of sort of waking up in pain, or the idea of minimizing behavior due to pain, is something that you don't think about it until you actively have it. And I've and you meet people who. I think for people who don't experience that, there's always a certain level of having to sort of like really find language and images to express that in a way that is otherwise quite tricky.
When I talk to people about, explaining that I've dealt with chronic migraine for close to 20 years, and I talk about how when I have really severe, serious migraines, and I've seen other people describe it this way, it's like a nail being driven into my skull. So, that feeling of like, oh my God, like when will this ever end? Someone who has not experienced that can, take that very visceral image and feeling and try to understand. It will not really perfectly translate to the real feeling, but, using the clearest language possible is the only way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Totally.
And I've been in a situation recently where I have been incredibly sick with something else, to the point where it feels like you can feel all of the internal organs pressing up against each other at points. So unpleasant and painful it was. The responses I've had from that have ranged from very supportive to somebody being rather prim about me swearing in pain. So it's a whole spectrum of experiences, really, shall we say, when it comes to this.
I think it's especially difficult if you're talking about a pain that can't be seen, because a migraine can't be seen. Nobody's going to see a bandage around my head. They're not going to see the experience I have mentally of having to deal with that. If they saw my arm in a sling, they might think differently. But, to say that there's something wrong with my brain, that's a very difficult thing to have to parse, because I have to keep doing what I need to do no matter what on a daily basis. I can't always let it stop me from doing things, but it is a very difficult thing.
Which is why the Flanagan documentary, it has that wonderful sequence where one of the key signs, I think, of cystic fibrosis is that very chesty cough, because your lungs are filling with fluid. And for the large part of the film, Kirby Dick chooses to elide any footage of that. It's just sort of it's very absent. And then there's this quite intense montage of about 2 or 3 minutes where he brings it back to get where he ties it in, notably looping it to footage from earlier sequences within the film. Notably. And I think that's a really important element there, and probably a reason why the film, for you, Bob, perhaps feels a little bit more easy to access, is because there is a clear signifier of Flanagan's condition, wherein chronic joint pain, chronic migraines, for what I was going through this past month or so, well, a few months or so, frankly, but it was particularly bad late last month, is far, far harder to see, and therefore far harder to believe, especially by medical professionals. I think it's fair to opine at this point.
Yeah.
Well, that's the hardest part, I think, just speaking to my own personal experience of when you're in pain and professionals don't believe you. I've had that happen as well, where you feel like you have to justify what you're going through, and that creates a new layer of emotional pain on top of the physical pain. That's something that you can't always explain to people if they've never experienced something like that. They can try their best to have sympathy for you, but they may not be able to have empathy if they can't fully understand that kind of frustration in addition to the physical, incapabilities and difficulties.
Well, here's my segue. I've got pain in my bladder right now. So.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, never did I think we would pivot away from a film about chronic pain to a discussion of one man's bladder, but here we are. This is the magic of Split Your Head.
We made it.
I'm kidding. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist.
No.
It's a good pivot. It's funny.
It's a pivot to say we do have to keep track of time and everything.
Yes.
And I don't mean to be insensitive at all.
We're already past 1 o'clock. I understand.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't you worry about it. Don't you worry.
And there's a questionnaire, so let's get to the questionnaire. Is there any last words that you guys want to say about any of the films, or?
I've got just that I'm really grateful I got to see them. Obviously, when people have watched this episode, you'll notice that some of the footage is a bit eccentric, especially my presence here. It's been a real pain to get all of this together because of obviously where I live. But it's been a real pleasure to watch these films and to have a discussion. Obviously, but Bob and I have had a wonderful discussion already on British horror, but it's been just really nice. It's just been a real pleasure to do that, but also to bring Jetta in on this as well, who is somebody who I've known for a long time, and who we've shared a lot in terms of both on Letterboxd and off, and so it's been a real pleasure to interact this way, even if sometimes my enthusiasm can tip into conversation domination, shall we say.
That's okay. I feel totally reassured by my own opinions. Don't worry.
No.
Well, I will say, something that's interesting to me is thinking about films that have a perception of difficult to watch or could I watch them. I think there have been a lot of films over time that I've worried I wouldn't be able to handle. And I find over time that, I can handle a lot more than I've thought. And there's really nothing holding me back from watching something if I can understand why it was made. I think that's the important thing for me. For me, it is harder to watch a film that is boring, that I think is poorly made, that is...
Absolutely.
If it's a film where I understand the purpose of it, no matter what the content and, how personal, how difficult, how revealing, sad, tragic toward the end, in the case of Sick, if I feel like it was all done for a reason, then I'm not going to turn away. And I think that's a very interesting thing to reckon with as a film viewer. Like, I can handle things that maybe I used to think, because I'm sure there was a point where I heard of Sick, because I've heard about it for a long time, I've known about it for many years. I probably thought a long time ago that I would not be able to handle it. Like, it was something too intense. Whether or not I perceived it as shocking, I don't remember. But I'm sure I heard about it being too much. And in fact, it's really not too much because it is about a real person's life. And so I think the validity of that and the importance of understanding that trumps everything else.
Yeah, well said. All right, questionnaire time. So you guys don't know these questions. They're brand new. Let's just get going. Should we do an order of answering?
Yeah. Jet, would you like to go first?
Sure.
Jetta, then Ethan? Okay, makes it easier. All right, what is one item you can't live without?
I have a favorite watch. It's leopard print. I like it. I just like wearing it. I feel weird if I don't have it on. So
that's awesome.
Every day. Ethan's seen it.
Yes, I'm pretty sure I have seen it, yeah.
Yeah, I wear it every day, and I feel like if I'm not wearing it, it's like I'm not an adult, because an adult wears a watch.
Right, yeah. Ethan?
I was gonna make a joke, a slightly macabre joke answer, and say something like cocodamol, which is a painkiller.
I don't know what that is. Oh,
if you need it, you need it.
Deep cut.
Yeah, deep cut indeed. No, I don't know. To be honest, really, if there's one that has a sort of a real poetic sensibility to it. No, I suppose the one that just comes to mind, it's the most obvious one, is my glasses, frankly, because
great,
important.
It's incredibly important because, admittedly, my vision is much clearer, but still, I can barely do anything without them. And so, I think the moments when I feel the most helpless is when I can't see. So I think it probably would be those. Yeah.
That should have been my answer. I can't see anything without my glasses. I don't know why I didn't think of that.
Okay, what was the last great movie you saw in theaters?
The Monkey? I like The Monkey.
Okay, cool.
That's the last new movie. Because I haven't been to a lot of new movies recently, but it's a great movie. Very fun. Cool. Very macabre.
Okay. Ethan?
It's another Osgood Perkins, actually. It's long legs.
Oh, wow. That's last summer?
That was last summer. I've seen films in the cinema after it, but for some reason that one has stuck with me the most for very, very personal reasons.
Nice.
Yeah, I know all the criticisms behind it. I accept them. And yet, for some reason, it still stands in my memory in this very specific perspective. So yeah, it's that one.
It's a great movie. Yeah,
We take a very pro Osgood Perkins stance on this podcast.
nice.
Yes. Join us for Gretel and Hansel next time.
That's the only one I haven't seen, I think. Oh,
Yes,
no, I
the
didn't
only
see
one
Long
I've not
Legs
seen.
either. Okay. Well, I have some catching up to do.
Yeah.
What was the last great concert you went to?
Oh, I was just telling some friends of mine about when I saw probably the greatest double bill you could ever have, the B-52s with opening act Casey and the Sunshine Band, where I was, I'm sure, the youngest person there by about 40 years.
Probably, yes.
It's just amazing because I was talking to a friend of mine who said he had never been to a concert, like ever, in his life, and he's in his 20s, so I thought that's very interesting. He lives in New York, so, there are opportunities, but, I was explaining the fact that I spent over $700 on that ticket because I wanted to be in the fourth row, and I wanted Cindy Wilson to look right at me when she did. So, I was very happy with that because the B-52s are one of my lifelong favorite bands, and I like Casey and the Sunshine Band too. They played all the hits. So I was so incredibly happy when I went to that. It was I think it was October or November 2021. So that was the first time I'd been back to a concert in a while. It was incredible. Just you want the B-52s to be as fun in person as you imagine from all their music. You want that liveliness, that energy, and they're just, they're amazing. So I was incredibly happy. Although I would say runner-up when I saw, one of the times I saw Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, when I saw them. I saw them at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, where I was in general admission, also right up at the front of the stage, smushed in. Nice. And that's not great when you're as short as I am and people are crushing you and crowding you. That was also really great. But B-52s, that was money well spent.
That's awesome. Ethan?
I remember Jetta talking about that. I think you've seen the B-52s, is it multiple times now?
No, I just saw them I had to see them because that was their farewell tour, or at least they said it was. Maybe they're still doing it, but I've seen Nick Cave several times.
Because I do remember, I think you and I have talked about that concert, or it's come up a couple of times, and so it's just very clearly, I associate that with that. I am going to go for one from a few years ago, because I don't really see concerts. And I'm going to be really annoying, and I'm going to choose an opera. It's the only opera I've ever seen.
Totally. Yeah, it works.
It was Akhenaten by Philip Glass. They had a staging of it in the UK a few years ago now, and it was sensational. It was, I've never seen an opera before on stage, and it was the costumes, the movement. It's done in this very ceremonial, very reverent speed, because obviously it's about the ascension of this particular pharaoh and his passing. To add another macabre touch to this episode. I just remember being hypnotized by it more than anything. And we were in the stalls, the person I went with, looking down on this on the stage below, and you could see everything. You could even see bits of the backstage, which I liked because it gave me a certain level of I wouldn't say control, but you saw the mechanics, and I always am fascinated by the mechanics. So I would say it was that. Frankly. Cool. And of course, it's Glass.
Can I also mention for Ethan's benefit the most British concert I've ever been to?
You may, of course.
Yeah.
I saw a double bill of Suede and Manic Street Preachers.
Oh,
and
that's very British.
I was very offended that people left after the first half when Manic Street Preachers came on. Like, come on. Like, they're good too. I guess. Yeah. I mean, it's always a hard sell in Brooklyn for these bands. Like, you're not going to necessarily, it was not sold out by any means. So, I was disappointed by the lack of, attendance, but great. Also great.
If you tolerate this, then your children will be next.
There you go.
Okay, next one. What was the last great book you read?
That's difficult because I like to start books and not finish them, so I don't know what I should say.
Same,
I'm so busy.
Same.
Oh, wow.
You should answer that first, Ethan. I don't know. I have to think about this.
Okay.
I actually have to scroll. I'm going to do something. I'm going to scroll back through. I keep lists of books
cool.
that I read. In the same way I plan all of my things up. Oh, I know what it was very easily. It was Austerlitz by Siebold.
Okay.
I'm not sure if I'm sure Jetta knows who W.G. Sebald is.
Yeah.
Bob, I'm sure. Have you heard of him at all, Sebald?
Is it Siebold?
SEB.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
Sebald.
Mm.
No, I don't think so.
He was a German author who
Mm.
moved to, of all places, East Anglia in England.
Okay.
And he wrote a few novels. He wrote maybe 4 or 5. They are complex, digressionary pieces about memory and time and how we understand history and how everything is effectively connected in various ways. And the pleasures of collection, the pleasures of connection, they are astoundingly dense pieces. His first one I read, Rings of Saturn, is effectively just his talking about a walking tour he took through Britain, which then turns into this like massive cosmic journey through space and time and history and recent history and the legacy of the Holocaust.
Wow.
It is a superb book, unbelievably dense, unbelievably complicated. Now Slits is just as good. So I will go for that, frankly.
Okay.
Can I answer this by suggesting what I'm going to read next?
Do it.
I like that.
That's about the best I can do.
Okay.
So, my friend Adam and I have been watching Mickey Rourke films, or at least we watched one, and I think we planned on some others. And so he suggested, well, first I wanted to watch the sequel to 9.5 Weeks, which is supposed to be absolutely horrible. It's called Another 9.5 Weeks, which I'm sure is not anywhere near as special. It's like direct-to-video from the late 90s. But before doing that, I want to rewatch the first one, which for the record I'm not a fan of. Don't like it. But I thought it would be interesting to read the original novella, and before reading the novella, to read a memoir, because the woman who wrote them she published 2 books. One of them is a memoir of her childhood, and the other is really a romana clef, because the story of 9.5 Weeks is really something she experienced personally. But before reading that, the memoir she wrote is about how she grew up in Nazi Germany, and her father was a Nazi. And so that is a very interesting story. It's called Ghost Waltz. And so she wrote that, I believe, under her real name, Ingeborg Day, but she published 9.5 Weeks under the name Elizabeth McNeil. And that's a really fascinating story. There's also, I think, either a New Yorker or New York Magazine piece all about her that was published around a decade ago. Because she lived just a fascinating life. She ultimately committed suicide, I think around 2012. So it's just a very, very interesting story. And I feel like that's really going to change the way I perceive 9.5 Weeks, knowing, because I didn't know that when I first saw the film, that this was a real story and why she went through that and what was motivating her and to what extent was it influenced by her childhood and her father.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would really like to read both of those.
Yeah, that sounds super interesting.
I look forward to that review, Jetta. Immensely.
Well, I don't think I'm going to like 9.5 Weeks any better this time. I really don't. Although, you know what?
Never know.
There is actually, it's supposed to be a prequel. It has nothing to do with it, called The First 9.5 Weeks, which I have seen, which is also from the late 90s. For some reason, these movies were made 10 years later, and that has Paul Mercurio from Strictly Ballroom.
Wow.
I don't know why he's in it, but he's, oh my God, it has, oh my God, I'm forgetting his name. Quick, Ethan, who starred in A Clockwork Orange? I can't remember his name.
Malcolm McDowell.
I was going to call him McGregor. Yeah, he's in it too, doing like a New Orleans accent. Very strange.
Okay.
So, yeah, The First 9.5 Weeks. Interesting movie. Anyway, yes. Next question, please.
Okay. This one's a doozy. But for his final meal, John Wayne Gacy picked KFC chicken, shrimp, and strawberries for your final meal before being executed. What would you pick?
Why would you do this to us? You know what? I had a really good meal last night. I went out with some friends after work. We went to a place in Chinatown called Sweet Moments, and I had a waffle that was soaked in Nutella, and it had ice cream on it, and it had strawberries on it. It was amazing. I don't know that that's like the best thing I've ever eaten in my whole life, but I'd take that.
Add it to the list for sure.
It was delicious.
Anything else you want to add? A drink or anything?
I will be healthy to the end. I will take water.
You failed.
I don't drink, so like there's really nothing exciting I can say. Like a Pepsi? I don't know.
Dr. Pepper?
No.
No, okay. Ethan?
We'll start with
Here we
a chicken noodle soup with fresh bread.
Okay.
Main course will be chicken katsu curry. No, pork tonkatsu curry.
Okay.
With white rice. Dessert will be the exact dessert that Jetta just said, but with banana instead of strawberry.
They offered that there.
Oh, did they offer that?
Banana
Excellent.
sounds better.
Yes.
And
No
we will have something that I discovered when, ironically, Jetta, I met you, which is public sweet tea. I will have a gallon of that.
Yes.
Oh, I've heard that's really good.
I grew a little demented by the public sweet tea. I think you can attest to how much I got it out the fridge.
Yes.
That sounds great. Okay, there's one last question. I won't lie, we're at the 2-hour mark, and this question tends to invite a very long discussion. Can art go too far?
Yes. It's a totally subjective thing. I mean,
I agree.
Why any one of us reacts to something in our particular way is totally up to us. There are things that I could watch that, based on my personal experience, I may not want to sit through. And that's totally up to me. That may not be understood by anyone else. And that cuts both ways, because there are things I love that other people look at and they're like, how could you watch this? What is wrong with you? So, it is a totally subjective thing. Yeah, that's pretty much where I stand. I mean, I love an awful lot of art that I'm sure people think is absolutely bizarre. So.
Done. Great. Ethan?
Yes. I think it's as very simple as yes.
Mm-hmm.
I am, unfortunately, somebody who is a little bit, I won't say censorious, but I take a position that art, as much as being an aesthetic product, art and artists also have a certain responsibility to not only those who witness it, because we obviously are in constant, we have the freedom of choice to engage with art in however which way we see fit, but it has, I think, sometimes, well, in pretty much all times, a duty of care to those who are involved in creating it, especially when it comes to cinematic art. For some reason, the one that comes to mind is not Marion Dora, which I know you and I have had conversations about, Bob,
right.
But actually it's Riefenstahl when I think about art.
Okay.
When I think about art having a line when it going to, and I think it's a relevant one to discuss considering the events in the last few months within America.
Yeah.
But also frankly, considering Riefenstahl's exploitation of the systems in order to create her own films. So Tiefland famously has a number of extras in it who were shipped from concentration camps, the Roma extras.
Wow. Okay.
And that included children. And that was a film that when it was released in the mid-50s, shall we say, was seen in an apolitical bent as pure art, notably by Cocteau, who was also somebody who proceeded to collaborate with the Nazis, or at least maintained a sort of a buddy-buddy relationship with them. So I do think, actually, that, frankly, art can go too far, not when it's about the spectator witnessing an object or an art piece. For example, say, Abramovich or other performance artist Flanagan, but rather when it's about the production perspective and the exploitation of those from within. That's where I think it can go too far.
May I say this also is something I think about when I think about the series I do on Letterboxd for women editors. I think about this in the context of, is this a movie I want to rewatch? Like, do I want to rewatch Triumph of the Will? Can I actually put myself through that? Or is it important for the history of women in film, in viewing this object, in understanding, in all contexts, why this is an important film. And that's not to say endorsing it, because of course I'm not endorsing it, but is it important to pick that for the series? Because this was an important moment in film history for many reasons. And can I deal with that? Can I use that? Or should I just ignore Riefenstahl completely? Because I think she should be on my list, but I haven't yet gotten to the point where I want to put her on my list. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So it is this, totally subjective thing. If I were just, talking about the montages and the edits with absolutely no personal connection to the material, I guess I could do that, but there is no way to do that. I don't see how I could do that. I can't talk about the footage contained therein and not have a feeling about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also think, sorry to jump off the end of your sentence there, Jetta, it's also to identify in that respect how ideology is a far more slippery thing than ideology, and political machinations are very complex things that cannot be, that obviously, yes, it was an incredibly important moment for women within film, but it was also done under a regime that fundamentally suppressed a lot of women's rights, placed them within the context of housewives and motherhood, so birth givers, shall we say, and was repressive in terms of homosexuality, female homosexuality included. So there's a number of sort of fault lines that at least to me feel necessary to discuss. But at the same time, as you say, it's hard not to have a very personal response to that footage, especially from your perspective. Incredible.
Yeah, I mean, you can't divorce the two. You really can't separate out. I know there is always that conversation of art versus artist, but in that case, when the two are so intrinsically, they're so tied together, you really can't do that. It would not exist. That film would not have been made were it not for her ability to make it and her choice to make it and having the access. So, yeah, I mean, there are just certain things where I don't feel like I'm in a place where I need to do it. I will find some other film to watch. I will, fill my time in some other way. And, if there comes a point where I feel like I need to do it, maybe there'll be a point in current American political, the current climate where I feel like now is the time. I need to talk about Triumph of the Will. I need to say something. Maybe that point will come where I need to do that. I mean, frankly, it's already here, but, where I feel like I have the wherewithal to do that.
If I may add one last final word, a wise man once said, "Don't hate the player, hate the game."
Are you about to say you miss 100% of the shots you don't take too? I mean, come on. We could just
at least mine is relevant.
Man really thinks he's Wayne Gretzky out here.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we got to end on that note, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know.
Mercifully.
It's an upbeat. No, we're ending with humor.
We're ending with
positivity.
Humor. But I do think it weirdly does apply. It applies to everything if you think about it. But anyways, Jetta, Ethan, thank you so much for coming on. I'm sure you'll be back sooner than later, and we'll talk about other shocking to some, shocking to maybe no one films. And it was great having you on. And that's
Thank you
it.
so much.
Lovely as always. Have a great day.
And great to see Ethan as well.
Yes, for a little bit.
Or hear him.
Yeah. You see
my dulcet tones.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Okay, guys. Have a great day. We'll talk soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.